Can you imagine this? What if tomorrow every single religion on Earth vanished into thin air like someone accidentally deleted a file from the cosmic desktop? No more churches, no more temples, no Bible, no Quran, no heaven, no hell, no one left to blame when you do something terrible. Would the world be more peaceful? It sounds like a sweet illusion, does it not? But hold that thought, do not get dreamy just yet. Because what you are about to hear is not a love song for world peace. This is humanity's classified file written in blood cursing and a mountain of grand justifications that, if you listen closely, are actually quite absurd. If you think the crusades were some kind of spiritual tour, that jihad is just hot yoga in the Middle East, or that atheism is the enlightened road to a world filled with kindness, then welcome. This story is going to crush each of those fantasies, then gently invite you to think again. Before we dive into this journey of unmasking history and stripping down the so-called righteousness, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Because unlike those who kill in the name of God, all I need from you is one click to save the dying art of storytelling here on YouTube. And whether you are tuning in from Hanoi, Houston, or a cave somewhere in Norway, leave a comment. I want to know, where are we, the curious ones who love poking at the past, coming from what you are about to witness is not just history bleeding. You are about to see the real reason why it never stops bleeding. Stick around till the end. Then you will understand. And you will never look at religion the same way again. Do we kill for God? Or just because we are human? If tomorrow you woke up and discovered that every religion in the world had vanished, poof like a plate of cookies in a dorm room fridge, no more churches, no Quran, no temples, no gods sticking around out of obligation, what do you think would happen, Mice? Would we all join hands and sing John Lennon's Imagine, or would we still beat the living daylights out of each other, only now with a brand new excuse, like one group loves pineapple on pizza and the other does not? So here is the real question. Without religion, would humans be any less violent? To answer that, we are going to have to wade through a pool of blood. One that is soaked in faith, reeking of power, and flooded with the murky waters of social hierarchy. And do you know what? The most ironic part is, a part of you, the same part that just clicked on this video, already believed. Of course, religion is the root of all wars. Get rid of it, problem solved. Wonderful. But let me tell you a few stories, real ones, complete with grand declarations, holy flags, and yes, even a few atheists who had a taste for world domination. Let us begin on a morning in the year 1096 somewhere in Europe. A ragtag group of peasants, decked out in makeshift armor like they were heading to an early Halloween party, were burning with zeal to liberate the Holy Land after a call to arms from Pope Urban II. They had no maps, no GPS, but plenty of righteous fury and empty stomachs. So off they charged into the Middle East, as if God himself was footing their Uber bill. The Crusades, it sounds noble, does it not? But in reality, it was a kind of blood-soaked road trip driven by the promise. If you die in this war, God will give you a VIP ticket to heaven. No waiting lines, no baggage check. Sounds pretty tempting. Until you realize most of the people involved had no real understanding of who God even was. They just knew one thing. If you kill in the name of God, you get a free pass. Basically, it was a license to murder with zero consequences. Now let us jump to the other side, jihad. Contrary to how many people misunderstand it, the original concept of jihad was not just about holy war. At its core, it was meant to represent an internal struggle, a path towards self-improvement. But you know what happens to moral ideals, right? They are incredibly easy to hack. And so jihad became a new power card. In the hands of kings, warlords, or sometimes just guys who enjoyed quoting scripture while swinging swords, Jihad morphed into the Middle Eastern version of just do it. Do whatever you want as long as you say you are doing it for God. When faith falls into the hands of politics, it is like liquor in the hands of a heartbroken man, dangerous, unpredictable, and often leaving behind a mess that lingers for years. At this point, you might be nodding along thinking, see, religion clearly is the root of it all. Hold on a second. I have not even mentioned Stalin yet. A man who believed in no God, no heaven, no higher power, only in himself. And guess what? He orchestrated one of the bloodiest purges in human history. Not because of religious differences, but simply because people disagreed with him. Now you are starting to catch a whiff of it, the stench of a truth just as foul as the corpses strewn across the deserts of Palestine in the year 1099. Human beings do not need God to kill one another. They just need a reason. We are violent not because of faith, but because of that intoxicating belief that we are right and they are wrong. Religion sometimes is just the sign hanging outside the bar where the fight breaks out. Some wars may look like they were fought for divine reasons, but underneath they were about land, money, and power. And there are other wars where no God is ever mentioned, but the blood still flows over a new ideology, the color of someone's skin, a piece of territory, or something as petty as a neighbor who just rubs you the wrong way. So no, this video is not here to make you anti-religion. And it is not here to defend religion either. It is here to dissect one of humanity's most difficult questions. Could we humankind live more peacefully if we abandoned all belief systems? We are going to travel through blood-soaked decades times when God's name was invoked, but it was always human hands doing the killing. We will meet atheist leaders who turned out to be just as brutal as the most radical religious fanatics. We will witness places without gods, yet overflowing with corpses. And by the end of this road, we will face an uncomfortable truth. The problem was never with the divine. The problem has always been us. This is not a story about religion. It is a story about motive. The motive to kill. The motive to conquer. The motive to feel superior to someone else. So if you think this video is going to be as simple as picking a side team God or team no God, let me warn you, you are playing the wrong game. This video is about humanity, a species that has found every excuse imaginable to destroy one another, from God to flags to skin tones, even pizza preferences. And this is where our journey begins. Bring your armor, or at least bring a mind willing to question. Because the truth ahead will not go down easy, but it is absolutely worth hearing. The Crusades. When God became a budget justification for war. In the year 1095, Pope Urban II stood in the square of Clermont, raised his hands to the sky, and declared, Deus vult, God wills it. And just like that, thousands of young European men, from out-of-work soldiers to bored poets in noble robes, suddenly came up with a plan: walk across an entire continent, kill people, and call it devotion. The Crusades. It sounded like a spiritual expedition funded by heaven itself. But in reality, it was more like a high-budget cosplay of the Almighty, complete with heavy weapons. You think they marched to liberate Jerusalem? Wrong. Many joined for what was arguably the best deal of the Middle Ages: legal murder with a full pardon from God. Buy one sin, get eternity free. Imagine this: you are a noble drowning in debt, have a few annoying neighbors, and want to boost your political resume. So you grab your sword, call it liberating the Holy Land, which sounds far more respectable than freelance stabbing. And do not forget, anyone who joined the campaign received total forgiveness. A full history wipe, like hitting Ctrl+Z on your karma. Even if you burned down an entire village like some medieval barbecue, as long as you wore the Holy Cross on your chest, heaven kept the door wide open. But even that description is being generous. Because in reality, many of the Crusades turned the Middle East into a brutal theater of unholy drama. The Crusaders did not just fight Muslims. They also made time to slaughter Jews, Eastern Orthodox Christians, and even local Christians, just because they were not reading the Bible in the correct language. It was not follow God or die. It was follow my version of God or die. And then there was Jerusalem, the holy city, sacred to three major religions, turned into a massacre. When the Crusaders captured the city in 1099, they transformed it into a death festival. Tens of thousands were butchered, blood flooded the streets, and there are written accounts claiming horses waded through blood up to their knees. Who knows if that is literally true? But can you imagine God, the deity of love, being invoked in what looked more like a blood-soaked rave? However, we must look deeper than the easy narrative of religion causes war, because behind the velvet curtains of ritual and scripture, a quieter question whispers. Were they truly fighting for God, or just using his name to justify invasion? The answer. It is kind of like when you tell your mom, I am going to a study group, but you are actually heading to a bar. Well, kings did the same thing. They said for God, when what they really meant was for land, for gold, and for power. King Richard the Lionheart, the beloved hero of the English people, is often painted as a champion of the Crusades. But this man once sold the title of archbishop and drained the royal treasury just to fund his armed pilgrimage. And throughout the campaign, he did not spend much time in church, but he did spend plenty of time beheading Muslim prisoners. Did God approve? Hard to say. But one thing is certain, Richard definitely leveled up his political clout after the war. And what about Emperor Frederick II? Now this guy joined the Crusades without ever actually fighting. He simply sent letters, negotiated deals, and managed to reclaim Jerusalem through a treaty without drawing a single sword. That, of course, drove the Pope absolutely mad. Because you know what? A war without blood does not turn a profit. Religious warfare, in the end, was never just about fighting for faith, it was an industry. And that is the point. God might be the reason you unsheath your sword, but it is resources, politics, and reputation that keep you swinging it. Religion in the hands of the ruling class became a kind of divine credit card. The more you spent, the more you gained. Later, crusades gradually lost their spiritual veneer and shifted fully into political campaigns. The Fourth Crusade. They did not fight Muslims. They attacked Constantinople, a Christian city, simply because it was convenient. Killing Christians in the name of Christ's spirituality had clearly stayed home to pray. By now you might be starting to feel a little uneasy. God was used as a publicity stunt. Faith became a slogan stamped onto armor. People died not because God willed it, but because someone wanted a few more acres of land, a couple more fortresses, and maybe a few epic ballads sung about them in the town square. So if you ask, were the Crusades really about faith, or were they just a holy-looking disguise for worldly ambition? I would ask you this in return. If it was truly about faith, why did Crusader armies so often kill people from their own religion? If it was about salvation, why did the Pope grant indulgences to mercenaries who slaughtered civilians? If it was about God, why was gold the deciding factor in whether you could join the crusade? God may be all-powerful. But during the Crusades, he was dragged down to play the role of the licensing officer for slaughter. And that forces us to start wondering, was religion truly the root cause of it all, or just the most convenient excuse? The answer is not easy, but our journey is far from over. Next time we will turn our gaze across the desert to where the concept of jihad was also wielded like a license to kill, only this time in Arabic. Because as you already know, if blood is the common language of humanity, then the reasons we shed it come in all shades, even the shade of faith. Jihad, a war for God or just a sanitized label for ambition? Picture yourself living in the Arabian desert in the 7th century, a place where if the sun did not burn you alive, your neighbors just might get the job done first. Then, out of the dunes, a man named Muhammad emerges carrying not just a message from God, but an entire blueprint for society covering everything from personal ethics to the rules of warfare. And thus Islam is born, along with a central concept that still makes people tense up: jihad. The word jihad does not mean kill everyone who disagrees with you. In fact, its original meaning is struggle or striving. And among its many interpretations, there is a peaceful one: the inner struggle resisting temptation, improving oneself. Think of it as spiritual gym training for the soul. But like so many noble ideals, once it passed through the hands of politics, it became something far sharper, a weapon not only for slashing enemies, but also for silencing dissent. At first, jihad was used as a defensive principle to protect the fledgling Muslim community from outside threats. It was like a divine panic button. We do not want to fight, but if you force our hand, then so be it. However, things began to change very quickly. Only a few years after the Prophet Muhammad passed away, Muslim armies began a phase of expansionist jihad, a kind of divine Google Maps operation, except instead of pinning restaurants, they were pinning empires. From the Arabian Peninsula, they swept across deserts, stormed into Byzantine territory, crushed the Persian armies, and reached as far as Spain. In less than a century, Islam went from a persecuted minority to one of the largest empires on earth. And jihad, originally a call to defend, evolved into one of the most potent political slogans in the Islamic world. Now you might ask, so were all those conquests truly for the faith? Was it really about bringing the light of Allah to the world? The answer is not exactly. In fact, not very often. Behind every call for jihad was a list of reasons that would sound familiar to any empire: collecting taxes, seizing territory, controlling trade routes, and strengthening internal authority. In other words, it was like ordering a vegetarian pizza, but then adding sausage on top, righteous on the outside, ambitious on the inside. In the year 711, Muslim armies crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and entered the Iberian Peninsula. They did not bring Quran printing presses to spread the faith. They brought swords and new tax rates. And on the other side, the local population did not exactly mourn the fall of the Visigothic kingdom, whose royal family was already corrupt and oppressive. That shows you something: religion may be the facade, but power is what really opens the city gates. The caliphs at the time functioned much like modern-day CEOs, expanding markets, securing supply routes, optimizing tax systems. Jihad was the marketing poster, inspirational, sacred, and great for recruitment. After all, who would say no to a campaign where you could die for God and also come home with loot and social status? Did you know jihad warriors were not necessarily required to convert the people they conquered? In fact, in many territories, Muslims encouraged the locals to keep their own religions as long as they paid the jizya, the so-called protection tax, for non-Muslims. So this idea of spreading faith by the sword was not quite as universal as you might think. Sometimes jihad operated more like a franchise: open a new branch, govern through culture, and collect royalties every month. And this brings us to a critical distinction. Defensive jihad, fighting to survive, is very different from expansionist jihad, fighting to gain power. One is a shield, the other a hammer. Under caliphates like the Umayyads and Abbasids, jihad began to transform from spiritual principle to political tool. And it was not just used against outsiders. Muslim civil wars, especially between Sunnis and Shias, also invoked the idea of jihad to justify bloodshed. The enemy was no longer simply the unbeliever, but the wrongly believing. And then, as the centuries rolled on from the Ottoman Empire to modern Islamic movements, jihad kept getting reheated like leftovers, only spicier every time. From defending Palestine to waging holy war in Afghanistan against the Soviets, and eventually mutating into something far more extreme in the hands of modern terrorist organizations, jihad became a kind of incantation, say the word, and blood follows. But let us be clear, not all Muslims support violence in the name of jihad. On the contrary, millions have spoken out against the misuse of this concept. The problem is not the religion, it is how people use religion to justify actions they already had in mind. A sword hidden behind a scripture is not the scripture's fault, it is the fault of the one holding the sword. Just like the crusades, jihad was once a symbol of ideals, but it too was hijacked by sweaty hands craving power. And this raises a very sharp question. Was jihad simply a label slapped onto a sword that was already swinging toward someone's mouth? You might think we are criticizing Islam, but we are not. What we are doing is exposing how any religion, when manipulated, can become a license to inflict violence. It does not matter if you call it a crusade, a jihad, or a people's liberation. When humans want to kill, they will always find a noble-sounding name to justify it. And now you begin to see the real battle is not between religions. It is between truth and manipulation. Religion does not kill people, but people do. And they often carry sacred symbols to make their actions look righteous. Next time we will meet those who needed no God, no church, no Quran. All they needed was ideology, the new religion of the 20th century, to justify a sea of blood. Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot. All of them were atheists, and the blood still flowed. When we kill without God, all it takes is an ideology and a loud-mouthed leader. If you have ever thought, aha, the solution to violence is to eliminate religion, well, I have bad news, and a blood-soaked lesson from the 20th century. Because while medieval kings raised the cross or shouted jihad to rally the people into battle, modern leaders did something eerily similar without needing God at all. No heaven, no salvation promises. All they needed was an ideal, an ideology, and enough loyal followers to crash Instagram if it had existed back then. Introducing Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, the unholy trinity of atheism, who managed to unleash levels of slaughter that would make even the most bloodthirsty medieval popes do a double take. Welcome to the world of atheists. With a filing system. Soviet Union, 1920. Religion was no longer a path to salvation, it was declared the enemy of the people. Stalin did not believe in God, but he believed in absolute order in the party, and most importantly, in himself. And when you believe in yourself to an absolute degree, there is no God around to whisper, hey, maybe mass murder is a bit much. So the Russian Orthodox Church was shut down. Priests were executed. Worshippers were shipped off to the Gulag. Religious symbols were stripped from every building, replaced with portraits of Stalin, enlarged to the point where you could count each individual mustache hair. They did not just burn Bibles, they burned the very concept of the sacred. And in its place, they installed something new, Marxism, a rebranded holy scripture minus the God, but heavy on the revolution. Sin was no longer lust or pride. Sin was now counter-revolutionary thought, incorrect belief, or worse, not loving the leader enough. A familiar scene, crowds lined up to hear speeches, clapping like robots. Every time the leader's name is mentioned, chanting slogans, fists raised high. A prayer service with no God, only secret police watching from the shadows. Religion was no longer the issue, but blind faith remained untouched. It had simply swapped its robes for the masks of science and progress. Then came China. Mao Zedong, the man who declared religion is the opium of the people, but went on to build an entire cult, where he himself was the supreme deity. During the Cultural Revolution, Buddha statues were smashed, temples destroyed, monks humiliated in public. The Red Guards, Mao's youthful disciples, became a fanatic force ready to torture their own parents if they were labeled counter-revolutionary. Pause and think about it, a society without God, yet full of rituals, symbols, and doctrine. Only now the high priest sits in Beijing, not in the sky. Pol Pot, meanwhile, operated on a whole different level. He was not just godless, he wanted to erase all traces of the old world religion family history, even eyeglasses. Yes, you heard that right. Wearing glasses meant you could read. Reading meant you were an intellectual. Intellectuals, they were marked for death. Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge became a chilling experiment. What happens if we reset an entire society back to zero? The answer: somewhere between 1.7 and 2 million people died. Not because of faith, but because of ideology. What made these atheist regimes so dangerous was not the absence of belief, but the absence of restraint. No eternal sin, no judgment after death. No one above them in the moral food chain. And when there is no God to fear, all that is left is fear of man. And do not assume this was just an Eastern thing. Albania, a European nation, became the world's first officially atheist country in 1967. Under Enver Hoxha, all churches, temples, and shrines were shut down. Worship was outlawed. Possessing a Bible could get you imprisoned or executed. No God, no Allah, nothing. Only the party. And a mustached leader that would have made Karl Marx feel underdressed. So here is the question: if we eliminate religion, do we eliminate violence? Look at the death tolls. According to various estimates, Stalin was responsible for between 10 and 20 million deaths. Mao, possibly over 30 million, if you include the Great Famine and political purges. Pol Pot, between 1.7 and 2 million, nearly a quarter of Cambodia's population at the time. The Crusades, the Inquisition, extremist, jihad. Even combined, they might not surpass the body count of Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot. So the issue is not whether you believe in God or not. The question is, what do you believe in when God is gone? Because when God is dethroned, that throne never stays empty. It just gets filled by a different king, often a bald guy who loves writing slogans in capital letters, hangs portraits of himself on every wall, and launches thought purification campaigns like he is playing a real-life version of Among Us. Humans always need something to believe in. And if it is not a god, it will be a leader, a party, a flag. And sometimes that kind of belief is even more dangerous than ancient faiths, because it allows no room for doubt. No heaven, no hell. Just re-education camps and 8-hour ideological struggle sessions. So if you still think violence is religion's exclusive trademark, let me invite you to take a look at the 20th century, where people killed each other with industrial efficiency, no divine approval, required just enough ink and machine guns. Killers do not need God. They just need a reason. And often, the fewer moral restraints they have, the easier it is to pull the trigger. In the next part, we will dig deeper if both religion and atheism have spilled oceans of blood. Then maybe the problem is not in the belief itself, but in how humans always seem to divide into teams and find excuses to start swinging. Do not look away. The feast of logic and blood is far from over. Religion, ethnicity, nation. The love triangle of violence. Do you hate someone because of their faith or because they happen to be related to your enemy? It sounds like a simple question, but throughout history, it is the kind of confusion that got millions killed, people who had no idea what they died for, other than being in the wrong place when history lost its mind. Welcome to the most complicated part of this entire drama, where religion, ethnicity, and nation join forces like three best friends, all trying to date the same woman. None of them truly love her. They all just want ownership. We are often taught that religious wars were about faith, but let me take you on a stroll through history, where faith was often just lipstick on the barrel of a gun. Here people killed, not just because they prayed differently, but because they looked different, spoke a different language, came from the wrong land, or simply belonged to the wrong team. Let us rewind to one of the classic religious wars of Europe, the 30 Years' War. The name alone is exhausting because no one fights for God that long without some extra incentives. And sure enough, what started in 1618 as a conflict between Protestants and Catholics within the Holy Roman Empire, spoiler, it was neither holy nor truly an empire, quickly turned into a battleground for the heavyweights of Europe. At first, it seemed straightforward, a religious dispute. Protestants rebelled, Catholics wanted to bring them back into the fold. But suddenly countries started jumping in without even being invited. France, a Catholic country, began funding the Protestant side. Why? Because they hated the Habsburgs, the royal family controlling the Holy Roman Empire. God did not matter. What mattered was sticking it to your least favorite neighbor. And so for 30 years, Europe became a boiling stew of war. Civilians were slaughtered, cities burned, crops stolen. In some areas, populations dropped by up to 40%. But if you had asked one of the generals at the end of it all, which God were you fighting for, he might have only remembered the name of the county he lost. Religion started the war, but power, geopolitics, and centuries-old grudges poured gasoline on the flames. Now let us jump to the near-modern era, the Bosnian War of the 1990s. A conflict labeled as ethnic, yet drenched in the scent of religion and politics. The Serbs were Eastern Orthodox, the Croats were Catholic, the Bosniaks were Muslim, and instead of the three groups sitting down over coffee to discuss the future of their country after Yugoslavia fell apart, they collectively decided, you know what, let's shoot first and figure things out later. Here's the thing, no one marched into battle carrying a sign that said, I fight for my faith. They went to war because their neighbor had killed their cousin, because their ancestral city was under the control of the other side, because they believed if they did not act now, their people would be wiped out. Religion was not the cause, it was the label, the uniform of the side you were on. When war breaks out, you do not need to know what the other person believes. All you need to know is that they are not you. And that is often enough to pull the trigger. This is the psychological twist of so-called religious wars. Sometimes they are not driven by theological hatred, but by tribal loyalty, by the belief in an us versus a them. God is just the logo. Modern studies show that many so-called religious wars are actually driven more by politics, economics, or ethnic division. Religion becomes a recruiting tool, a symbolic scarf wrapped around a military unit, so you know who is on what team without needing to ask. It is like playing soccer where one team wears red, the other blue. But you forget the color of the jersey does not make you a better player. It just makes you easier to punch if you run onto the wrong field. In fact, religion often gets dragged in to explain actions that had little to do with belief. If an explosion happens in a Muslim-majority region, the phrase religious terrorism is instantly thrown around. But if that same explosion happens elsewhere, it might be called politically motivated violence or ethnic conflict. The label matters more than the facts. This story is not about religion causing violence. It is about how, when conflict is already brewing, religion becomes the easiest flag to wave. Imagine this: two groups of people fighting over a piece of land. One side says, "This is the land of my ancestors." The other says, This is the sacred ground of my faith. And just like that, a real estate dispute turns into a war of the soul. There is no easy peace when each side believes it represents eternal truth. And when religious belief becomes entangled with ethnic identity and political interests, it becomes impossible to tell where God ends and sovereignty begins, or where national pride blurs into rage. All that remains are bodies. So next time someone says, "This is a religious war," ask in return, is it really? Or is it about land, about revenge, about a twisted version of history? Because in war, the enemy is not always someone with a different faith. Sometimes the enemy is just someone from a different zip code. We think we hate each other because of God. But in truth, we hate because someone once killed our father, burned our house, raided our village, and now we place that hatred on the altar and call it righteousness. Religion in wars like these is no longer the reason. It becomes the language used to translate hatred into something holy. And once hatred is made sacred, it does not need a reason to survive. It only needs history and memory. But human memory is full of holes, and sometimes those holes are filled with blood. If you have watched this far, it means you are not just listening to a story. You are searching for something deeper, something that turns history from a pile of dry dates into a warped mirror reflecting today. And if anything you have heard made you rethink the world, or at least laugh bitterly through the tragedy, then help me keep telling this story. Hit that subscribe button. Every subscription is like a pat on the back for a storytelling team that runs on zero sleep. And if there was a moment that stood out, a question you have, or even if you want to call me out, leave a comment. I live for civilized arguments. History is not over. But storytelling only begins when someone listens. And you are listening. So stay. Is a world without God really more peaceful? Imagine a world with no churches, no Bible, no Sunday morning bells calling the faithful. No Mecca, no Ramadan, no cross on the wall. A world without God, any God. No belief, no heaven, no hell, no karma, no cosmic justice. Just people, laws, and each other. Would such a world be less bloody? It sounds like the plot of a Black Mirror episode. But this question has already been tested not just in theory, but through the skin, blood, and sweat of real societies. We could begin with the places often cited as the closest thing to earthly paradise, the Nordic countries. Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, nations with some of the highest rates of atheism in the world, where if you say "thank God" on the street, someone might genuinely ask. Which one in these countries, those who identify as non-religious, often make up 60 to 70% of the population, sometimes even more, among younger generations. The churches are still there, but mostly used for weddings or Instagram shoots. The priests more like wedding planners than spiritual guides. And the strange thing is, these places are actually pretty peaceful. Crime is low. Violence is rare. The society is so civil, you can leave your laptop in a coffee shop, walk away for an hour, and it will still be there when you return. No wars, no religious purges, just bicycles, free education, and whole grain bread. So is this proof that no religion equals no violence? It sounds convincing, until you flip the map over. There are still places with little to no religion, but the air reeks of gunpowder. North Korea, for example, is officially an atheist state. The government controls every form of religious expression, but it is also one of the harshest societies on earth, where watching a South Korean movie could land you in a labor camp. There is no God to fear, only the supreme leader, a man regarded as eternal, all-powerful, and significantly less humorous than any known deity. And then there are communities where religion never played much of a role to begin with, small tribal societies, isolated groups, far removed from the world's big belief systems. You might think they would be peaceful, like ancient cave paintings brought to life. No. In many cases, they still fought. Not over gods, but over fish, over water, over the forest, behind the mountain, that just so happened to have a fat deer grazing in it. An interesting example can be found among the tribes of New Guinea. Here, hundreds of small communities once lived without centralized religion. No churches, no doctrines, but tribal warfare was as common as breakfast. Whenever two groups met, the machetes came out. You did not need to insult God. You only had to insult someone's pig. And so the story repeats, violence does not need God. It only needs a reason. We as humans do not just fight over divinity. We fight over honor, land, disrespect, resources, difference. Sometimes we fight simply because we do not like someone's face. In societies like Sweden, what helps keep the peace is not simply the absence of religion, it is the presence of everything else. Strong education, high social welfare, relative fairness in wealth distribution, and a justice system that does not flinch at punishing injustice. In such places, people do not need God to behave, because the law and social consequences already do the job. You do not refrain from committing assault because you fear hell. You refrain because the security camera is watching, the police will knock on your door, and the shame might follow you for life. That is not lack of morality. That is secular morality, where the law, the community, and personal responsibility take the place of divine command. But be careful. When we remove God from the picture, there is no guarantee that people will suddenly become kind. If there is no strong social structure to replace that void, it will be filled with something else. Extremist ideology, nationalism, leader worship, the belief that we are right and everyone else is wrong. God may no longer sit on the throne, but the throne is still there. And you know how it goes, thrones never stay empty for long. So know a world without religion is not necessarily a more peaceful world, unless it also comes with equality, education, rule of law, and a society capable of self-reflection. The issue is not whether God exists. The issue is whether something strong enough exists to stop people from pulling the trigger. And sometimes a cold criminal code is more effective than a blazing hell. Now you might be asking yourself, so should we keep religion or get rid of it? Do not rush. The next part will not give you the answer, but it will show you why, whether we believe or not. Human beings always need a reason to feel right. And that, when left unchecked, is the spark that can set every war on fire. Religion, the loudest speaker in a burning room. Picture a massive fire in the middle of a city. People rush to the scene. Thick black smoke coils into the sky. There are screams, sirens, the sharp crackling of burning wood. And amid the chaos, one voice rises above everything else. It did not start the fire. It is not the arsonist. But it is the first thing you hear. It is the loudspeaker. And for thousands of years, religion has been that loudspeaker. It does not always set the house on fire, but it always gets blamed. There it is again, another religious war. It makes sense. Religion has uniforms, symbols, crosses, crescents, statues of gods. It has scriptures, songs, rituals. It has followers who believe so deeply they are willing to die for it or kill for it. And most importantly, it is visible, easy to spot, easy to blame, easy to label. As if the moment you see someone in priestly robes, you think, this guy must be about to stab someone for the Almighty. Meanwhile, those who kill for land, for power, for oil wear suits and look like they are heading to a board meeting. Religion has a kind of visual style that no other motive quite manages. It is bold. It is expressive. It is drenched in symbolism. So when violence erupts, no matter what caused it, If religion is in the room, it gets called out first. Take a specific example, the Iraq War in 2003. Many people, especially in the Muslim world, believed it was a war against Islam, that the United States invaded because of religious difference. But peel that label off, and what do you see? Oil, geopolitical influence, power dynamics in the Middle East, a desperate hunt for weapons of mass destruction that never appeared, and a president who seemed to believe he was chosen by God to bring order to the world, though what he actually brought was controlled chaos. Religion was present in how the story was told, but it was not necessarily the core reason. It was the box used to wrap a much messier, much murkier package. Just like when you argue with your partner and say, "I'm mad because you forgot our anniversary." The truth, you are mad because they did not care enough. The anniversary is just the name that is easy to say. Religion works the same way. It is not always the cause, it is just the most convenient label. At this point, you might ask, so how many wars have really been about religion? Not as many as you might think. According to several studies, only about 7% of all wars in recorded human history were primarily religious. The rest, politics, land, resources, ethnic hatred, and a fair share sparked by the egos of powerful men who should have been in therapy. And yet type war into Google and the first images that pop up are holy warriors burning crosses, crumbling statues of gods, bombed out churches. That is how collective memory works. It remembers the most vivid pictures. And religion, with all its fire, its extremism, its sacred weight, and yes, its blood, creates images that are very, very hard to forget. Religion is the loudspeaker. It does not make the first scream, but it amplifies the sound. It turns a clash between two groups into a holy war. It breathes a soul into dead bodies. It transforms a bullet into an act of eternal meaning. It turns war into a symbol. In a world where everyone is desperate to sort things into categories, who is right, who is wrong, religion becomes the perfect suspect. Because let us be honest, it is easier to believe we fight over sacred truths than to admit we kill each other over petty reasons, over land, over arguments, over someone feeling disrespected, over insatiable greed, over the fear of being left behind in the meaningless race called we are better than them. Religion reassures us, oh, this is a war of belief. It has a grand purpose. But the harsher truth is a lot of blood is spilled with no grand purpose at all. Just an excuse, and a few men crazy enough to believe in it. Look at modern civil wars. Syria, what started as a call for reform, turned violent after government crackdowns, and then religious factions joined the chaos. So, is it a religious war or a political conflict that spiraled into religious disguise? Myanmar, where Muslim Rohingya were driven from their homes by a Buddhist majority regime. But the roots: power, ethnicity, territorial control. Buddha never taught anyone to burn villages. But humans have no trouble using Buddha as a symbol to justify it. The problem is not religion. The problem is how people use religion as a tool to gather crowds, to build identity, to convince themselves we are righteous. And you know what? Every side does it, with or without a god. Nationalists have their own symbols, flags, anthems, national heroes, memorials, rituals that mirror religious worship, but instead of gods, they worship the idea of the nation. And when someone insults their country, they explode just as violently as someone whose god has been mocked. Anger, hatred, violence. These are not exclusive traits of the devout. They are human traits. And sometimes the loudspeaker, whether it is blasting hymns or a national anthem, is just that, a loudspeaker. It does not scream on its own. Someone turned it on. So if you ask why religion always gets blamed, here is the answer. Because it is too visible, too useful, too easy to hate, and too hard to look past. But we are looking past. And in the final chapter of this journey, we will explore this. If the problem is not the divine, but ourselves, then how do we live without repeating the same bloody cycle again? The answer is just beyond the final door. You have made it this far. Do not turn back. We do not need gods to die. Just a reason that sounds good enough. If you have followed from the very beginning until now, congratulations. You have just walked through the blood-soaked corridors of human history. No passport, no vaccine, just one simple question. If religion did not exist, would humanity be less violent? And after thousands of years of war, millions of corpses, and billions of prayers and battle cries in the name of faith, we circle right back to the starting line. The problem was never the divine. The problem has always been us. Religion does not hold the knife. Religion does not pull the trigger. Religion does not draw up battle plans or schedule village massacres at 3 a.m. All of that we do ourselves. We, the human species, have proven something terrifying. With or without God, we are fully capable of killing each other. And we will if given permission. Or worse, if encouraged. Religion is just one excuse among many. It is convenient, emotional, and easy to rally around. But take it away, and you will still find an entire wardrobe of justifications: ethnicity, nationalism, ideology, resources, skin color. The belief that our side is smarter. You can swap out holy war for people's liberation. Replace God says so with the Constitution demands it. Exchange this is the true faith with this is the superior ideology. The result will be the same: someone dies, and someone else says it had to be done. Many believe that if humanity had no religion, we would stop dividing ourselves. But imagine a world where everyone is an atheist. Do you think they would all unite? Probably not. Some would believe in radical individualism. Others would worship science to the point of denying morality. Some would idolize their nation like a god. Others would turn money power or even themselves into a deity. Because human beings always need to believe in something. And if there is no God to define good and evil, we will invent our own standards. And when those standards are threatened, we will defend them, as if they were divine. You do not need a church to start a war. All you need is an idea that someone else disagrees with. So the answer to our original question becomes clear: no. Without religion, humanity would not necessarily become less violent. We do not kill each other solely because of belief. We kill out of fear, out of a need for control, out of the terror of losing power, out of egos inflated like hydrogen balloons dangling next to a lit match. But do not lose hope just yet. There is a bright spot, small but real. Many forms of religious violence come not from faith itself, but from people misinterpreting it or twisting it to serve other purposes. So if we can reduce extremism, teach people how to read sacred texts, with reason promote free thought instead of indoctrination, and build fairer societies, then wars in the name of God could become far less common. Not eliminated, but reduced. And that is worth striving for. Because we do not need to destroy religion to live in peace. We just need to stop using God as a weapon. It sounds simple, it is not. But difficult does not mean impossible. It begins with admitting this religion is not a demon. And it is not an angel. It is a tool. And like any tool in the right hands, it can save. In the wrong hands, it can destroy. You can use faith to nurture compassion, or to ignite war. You can use atheism to think freely, or to build a dictatorship. And what separates those two paths is not God, It is you. This story, in the end, is not about religion. It is about responsibility. And if anything deserves to be sacred, it is humanity's ability to look in the mirror. Because blood does not spill on its own. It is human hands that make it flow. And it will keep flowing whether beneath a cross or under a red flag, if we do not learn to recognize the real monster. It is not in the sky, it is in the mirror. And if you are looking in that mirror and thinking, I do not look like that monster, good. But do not breathe easy just yet. Because everyone believes they are not the monster until they hold power and believe their cause is just. So instead of blaming the divine, ask yourself, what am I justifying? Because only when that question is answered, honestly, do we stand a chance of escaping the loop of history, the one where people kill each other and say it was for the faith. It was not. It was because we allowed ourselves to believe there was a reason good enough to kill another human being. That is all it takes. And all it takes to make the world a little safer is to believe in that reason a little less. If you have stayed with me until now, thank you. Not just for your patience, but because you have proven something. There are still people willing to follow a difficult question all the way to the end. History is not just a pile of ashes. It is a mirror, sometimes cracked, sometimes too clear, showing us our own faces, in rage, in belief, and in mistake. If this story made you laugh, think, or simply feel something, then please subscribe. Because this is just the opening chapter of a series of stories that are wilder, truer, and very much in the spirit of history, is not for the sleepy. Leave a comment if you have thoughts to share. I read them, I respond, and I am always ready to keep the story going.